Say hello to a new friend on an old road. Take a two-lane trip of memories into mysteries unknown. Come along for the ride. Jim Hinckley's America. Jim Hinckley's America.
Hey, good morning, my friends. I hope everybody's doing well today. It's a great time of the year for a road trip or two. Hey, we're going to be talking about quite a few things today, but we try to share America's story and provide some inspiration to live life, embrace life, make a difference in your community. And fellow we have with us today has that in spades. Good morning, Tom. How are you doing, young man?
I'm doing just fine, Mr. Jim. How are you doing this morning, sir?
People hear me say this pretty much every week, but I'd have to be dead a week for it to get better than this.
There you go. I like it, brother. I like it.
You
So no,
have, I stopped in Pawn World, Northern, and I was aware of your museum project. I wasn't aware of your collection, and I stopped into Pawn World looking for a wheelbarrow and stumbled into an amazing world of historic preservation. And that is your collection that you're putting together for the Museum of the Great Wars.
that is correct, sir. So I guess a little bit about it. I don't want to, not really sure how this all goes, but
Just
yeah.
talking
So what?
among friends.
That's it. So what started as really one piece, started as a collection, and then evolved into what is now the Museum of the Great Wars. So yeah, and it was born and started in a pawn shop in Kingman, Arizona, which I think is a pretty cool story all of itself.
Most definitely, most definitely. Kingman, Arizona has an incredible aviation history, but still, I was surprised when I started out on my wheelbarrow search, and they're standing a heated flight suit for a B-17 or heavy bomber flight crew. I thought, what did I stumble into here?
What have I found? Jim thought he was going to a pawn shop. He didn't realize he was going to make a turn into the Twilight Zone. So,
I, I wish I had that on. I wish that I had a hood so I could play that right now. That's what I was thinking. The Twilight Zone.
that's
Yes,
right.
indeed.
Well, Rod Sterling visits us a lot at the pawn shop. It feels like, because there's days where we're just getting totally beat up, and it's like you expect to look over and see him smoking in a corner, laughing at us or something. So, but
Well,
a lot of cool things happen here, and I mean that's the thing is, a lot of what people get to come into the pawn shop and see is local stuff that people have brought in, and they know that me specifically, that I'm collecting, and it gets me excited. And what happens, Jim, and I think you'll agree with this, you see this a lot with history, is as people who don't have any family get older, they get concerned of what's going to happen with these artifacts, these stories, what my grandfather did in the war. And it makes people happy to bring stuff in, and then they come in and they see it on the wall. A lot of that stuff, they come in and they're like, oh, they'll bring their family in or their friends, and they're like, that was my dad up there. And so it's really cool to have it be a local thing, and it's a true grassroots effort. So
one of the things I was impressed with your mission on this museum is there's a plethora. I mean, of museums dedicated to history, the war, and the history of the war. But your focus really seems to be more on the stories of the people.
well, that's absolutely correct. And what I guess, just to share a story with your listeners, and who, by the way, thank you all for tuning in this morning, and certainly Jim, thank you for having me. Um, what what started this was a guy brought in some stuff, and it was weird to me because I grew up in an Army family. My dad was in the service for 23 years. So I understand duty, honor, courage, these sorts of things. My dad was in Desert Storm. And this guy comes in and he's got this box of stuff. And Jim, if you're at all like me, you're like, ooh, a box of stuff. What's in the box? And he sets this box of stuff on the counter and he goes, well, this is my father's brother's items from Vietnam. And I was immediately shocked that he didn't say his uncle. And as it turns out, this gentleman had had gone overseas. He did almost a year in Vietnam. He was wounded. He had a Purple Heart. He had a Bronze Star. And when he got back to the States, he unfortunately was involved in a single vehicle accident that was fatal. And, when you really get into it, I mean, was it a deliberate thing, not a deliberate thing? That's a speculation. But here's this man who served his country who's now been forgotten, and his stuff is now being, traded off for, in essence, a very small sum of money. And I bought the stuff. I just asked the owner. I said, Jerry, do you mind if I buy this for myself? I don't think we should resell a Purple Heart. And Jerry, being a military guy at one point in his life, is like, no, absolutely. And we bought it. We brought it home. I put a shadow box together for this gentleman. I reached out on Facebook through an address that was in the bottom of the stuff, found people who he had gone to high school with, and gave him a name. And that was the start of this. And I had no idea 8 years ago when we did that it would lead us to where we are now.
Yeah, it's really amazing. I didn't serve myself. That's another story for another day. But my pa was World War II Navy in the Pacific, and then Coast Guard for quite a few years. So I have kind of a long, military history. In fact, I have a couple of things I'll be bringing out to donate to you
Awesome.
that just turned up from World War One that I
Oh,
think
very good.
that might be of interest. But I've always been fascinated with the stories of the people, not just military, but that's one reason we do this and everything I do at Jim Hinckley's America. It's the people. That's where the inspiration, that's the stories, that's the American story. And what you've been collecting and this museum idea of yours, gosh darn it, I think it's a top. We need this.
We do
And
need this.
Kingman is in a perfect position for this because of our long military history here in Kingman.
Well, you're absolutely correct. Not only do we have a long military history in Kingman, which I think, the to make the transition from I want to be a collector to I want to have a museum, that bridge got crossed because not only do we have a huge military history here in Kingman, Jim, one of the things that most people don't realize, Mojave County has the largest number of veterans per capita of any county in Arizona. Yet
Hmm.
we don't have a military history museum. We have the museums downtown and they do a phenomenal job of talking about local history, but I think it's fair to say that we should include the history of not just the people who are fortunate enough to be from here, but who choose to make this their home. And, you know, one of the things I always tell people is, and you'll relate to this, you can never tell everybody's story. You could try to,
No.
but you can't. But if I could tell enough individual stories, then people get a better understanding. And, we call ourselves the Museum of the Great Wars. We go on paper, officially, we go back as far as World War One. We go as far forward as Vietnam. The truth is, we've got some stuff that goes back to the Civil War. We've got some stuff from, the present Afghanistan and Iraq conflicts. But that World War One to Vietnam time period is really what we focus on. And that was, you've got three generations of Americans going from World War One with fathers to World War Two with sons to Vietnam and Korea with little brothers and grandsons. And then you've got, three conflicts or four conflicts rather, that all lead to each other. World War One directly to World War Two. World War Two directly leads to Korea and Vietnam. So it ties together well. And when you bring people in and you show them the little things, and that's what you're referring to when you talk about these amazing artifacts, is here is a cigarette case that belongs to Corporal Armstrong that we have, who was on the Bataan Death March. And
Hmm.
wow, you're holding this artifact that belongs to this man that saw so much suffering, who did not survive Japanese captivity. And then you have the story of how this artifact came home with his best friend, who he had that story that was the classic World War II awe story of he survived Japanese captivity. He comes home. As soon as his wife resigns her commission as an army officer because she's a nurse, or the woman who's taking care of him, they're able to marry because enlisted couldn't marry officers. They settle down. They have 3 kids. In this phenomenal story that leads into such an amazing time of America. We look at the 50s as early 60s as this amazing time. That certainly is a huge Route 66 thing. I mean, I think the 50s had some of the coolest looking cars. I mean, that was just the heart of what this country was. So
Yeah, this is the thing. It's the people. That's where the American story. And I get very upset. We've got a real concerted effort right now to whitewash history and make it more palpable. That's not what history's supposed to be.
no,
And
no,
but
you're
I'll
correct.
tell you another Kingman story that I was not aware of until I started working on the Kingman Main Street uh, uh, Kingman Tours project, the narrated self-guided tour. I have walked by our World War One memorial downtown for 60 plus years and never realized how significant it was. Are you familiar with the story behind that dedication on that
I am
memorial?
not, sir, but I would love for you to share that with everybody and myself included.
Well, a short version is that the sculptor who designed those statues, the Spirit of the Navy and the Doughboy, he also participated in the designs for the Mount Rushmore sculpture.
Oh, wow.
But the Spirit of the Doughboy, the soldier, was very popular. About 30% of World War One memorials use that. Spirit of the Navy, for some reason, nobody wanted. There was only about 7 made.
Really?
But here's where it's really interesting. Using the Spirit of the Doughboy, there was only a handful, less than a dozen, of these that were dedicated to a Native American. And
Okay.
our statue was dedicated in 1928 to Sam Swaskogami of the Wallapai tribe, who died in the Battle of the Marne in 1918. And our American Legion Hall downtown is 2 buildings. It's the base
Right.
theater and the base officers club, and it's the Sam Swaskogami Hall, named for
That's
Sam Swaskogami, the World War One veteran.
very cool. Yeah, I was not aware of that. I know we've talked to them down there at the American Legion, and they've actually got some stuff they're going to loan to us once we have our permanent building opened up, because they've got stuff that they have nowhere to display, and they do have some items from the Wallapai tribe from World War One, and that's going to be absolutely amazing to be able to put that on display and let people see that. So
The Wallapai tribe, I think it's Mike Watanabe, has been working a lot with veterans up there, and he's somebody you might be interested in talking with. He's wanting desperately to instill pride in the community, Peach Springs, the Wallapai Reservation, and preserve the veteran stories.
oh,
Uh,
that's an awesome project.
so I'll have to put you in touch with him. I think you'd have a lot to discuss.
Absolutely. Uh,
What's the status of your museum project now?
So where we're at with this, and I sort of blame myself. I keep telling people we're building a museum, and that's really not true. We have a museum. We do public displays already. We do presentations. We do all these things. What we're really building is our permanent location. And so let's talk about that a little bit. We bought a small commercial lot on the corner of Butler and Van Nuys over here in New Kingman, Butler. And it's not a huge lot, it's a third of an acre. We purchased a used 12 by 60 commercial building. You see them like these ones they set up at schools and offices and things like that. And right now we're in the process of getting the engineering stuff done so that building can be ground set, hopefully late spring, early summer. And with that said, be open at least part time by the first of next year. That's the plan. We were hoping to be open already, but Jim, everything that you think is going to take 3 months takes 3 years. And
Yes.
we were, one of the cool things is we made a deal on this building. Mojave Homes brought it over for us quite generously. They're the company working with us. And the gentleman who we bought the building from, we put a certain amount down. And after about 6 months worth of payments, he came in and he talked to me and he goes, I really like what you're doing for the community. And he donated the rest of that building to us. So that was a phenomenal, phenomenal donation. And so that's the, go ahead.
No, this is quite astounding. I'm very very excited about this, but I understand that you're almost already outgrown the museum before you get started because you're acquiring some rather large artifacts.
Oh well, that's where we're heading to, and so yeah, we've already outgrown this property. We've already outgrown the building. The building was too small when we bought it. The reality is sometimes you have to, well, every time you have to crawl before you walk. You've got to walk before you run. This building is, or this project, I mean, we've had some amazing donations. We've had a lot of people donate, here's $10, here's $20. We've had some, in Kingman, Arizona, when you go out and you fundraise with businesses, $1,000 is a really good donation. So a lot of this has come out of my pocket. Now I'm not a rich guy. I manage a pawn shop, and I do okay, but I mean it's not
Sure.
amazing. And it's not McDonald's money, but I'm not a six-figure CEO kind of person. So this has been a project that has to be metered and approached as far as money goes. And we knew that going in that it was already going to be small, but we're going with if we build it, they will come thing. Now, the project you're referring to, and I'm excited to announce officially on your show, in Mesa, Arizona, there's a gentleman named Robert Kropp. And Rob is a phenomenal guy. He loves Kingman. He grew up as a kid in the 70s going out to the airfield at Falcon Field before there was fences and would sit and get to play with the B-17s that were out there that were being used as fire bombers. He saved multiple aircraft from being scrapped over the years. Three of the aircraft that he saved were Lockheed PV-2 Harpoon U.S. Navy land-based medium bombers. Rob has donated one of those airplanes to our museum.
Oh.
So, Kingman, Arizona, there are probably 25 of these aircraft left anywhere on the planet. It's a big airplane. It's almost 60 feet long, 75-foot wingspan. They could carry 4,000 pounds of bombs, 5 forward-firing 50 caliber machine guns. Very, very, very cool airplane. And one of these airplanes is ours now. In fact, I just actually got the card from the U.S. Navy yesterday. The Navy saves everything, and it shows where all the airplane was stationed at during its service with the military. They did take delivery of it in March 1st of 45, so it did see service during the war. That service was stateside, training other anti-submarine and bomber crews that were re-equipping from the Ventura to the Harpoon. I also had a phone call last night from Dave, who is the president of the Airport Advisory Council. I believe that's their official title. He has spoken with the airport manager. He has spoken with the mayor. And this airplane, once it's assembled back here in Kingman and has a paint job, will be displayed between the terminal and the airport administration building for all to come see and enjoy.
Oh, superb. This is something a lot of folks traveling Route 66 miss is our airport.
Sure.
Not only is the airport cafe a great spot for breakfast, but you have one of the few remaining World War II era control towers,
Right.
and you have the memorials, the monuments
Sure.
to the training accidents that are very
Absolutely.
somber.
Well,
What a
to
perfect
tie into
place.
that a little bit, not to before I forget, I want to mention this, and because I think this is such a cool story, and I can't wait for you to meet this guy that's donated this
Yes,
airplane.
yes.
Rob was up here, gosh, this has been probably 15, 20 years ago, and a lot of people don't realize, as you pointed out, the training accidents, and I'm glad you hit on that because we lost 410,000 men in World War II, but over 100,000 of those men were killed in non-combat related accidents. A lot of that stuff happened at places like Kingman.
Yeah.
One of the best known stories, of course, is the bus that was hit by the train. I believe that's still the deadliest bus accident in Arizona. And we actually have an original newspaper from that, which I'm proud to say I did not laminate it, so please don't shoot me. I'm not the guy that did it, but it was laminated, I believe, probably by Rob. It came out of a different Rob Chillicothe. It came out of the old museum. That, along with a bunch of other Kingman stuff, we have just loaned to the Arizona Historic Society for a program where they're going to be sending stuff to schools for kids to learn about Arizona's history during World War II. In addition to that, there was the incident where the P-39 collided with the B-17. The pilot of the P-39 was killed. All the gunners on the B-17, no one survived. Rob, the guy who donated the airplane to us, went to the crash site 20 plus years ago, found one of the gunner's dog tags, and
Mm-hmm.
reunited it with that gentleman's son. So Rob loves Kingman. He loves our history. He's one of those guys that, how do we get things to, extend things back to the family? And I think it's going to be an awesome opportunity with this airplane up here. Literally, people will be able to park in one spot. You'll be able to take in the tower, which, as you pointed out, is one of, Jim, I honestly think it's one of like 2 or 3 original World War II towers still left.
Mm.
Most of them are gone. They'll be able to see the tower, the memorial. The airplane will be if you're facing it, to the left of that, between those two buildings, and then go inside and get a great meal. I mean, it's going to make it an awesome destination for people.
Yes, yes, yes. I'm very glad that you're doing the educational programs. This is really important. Uh, every once in a while, when we were doing the Kingman Army Airfield reunions back in the early '90s here, I got to meet with a lot of these veterans, and I got some different things. And the educational programs made me think. We actually had the Memphis Belle and their crew here in Kingman
Oh wow,
uh,
very cool.
during a bond drive program that they went and spoke at our local high school, and recruitment, bond drive, whatnot. But we actually
Sure.
had the Memphis Belle here for a while. I thought that was pretty impressive.
That's pretty cool. I mean, I think it's pretty cool when you actually look at the personalities who were here. Bob Hope, the Three Stooges. I mean, just some really, really cool people were here. And you know what? I don't know if a lot of people realize this or not, but and I don't think you'll mind me sharing this, but as you drive into the airport on whatever that's Mojave Airport Drive, I believe is the name of that road. And you go past the stoplight, you go past the tracks, and over to the right, just before you get to West Coast Netting, is this huge, great big concrete slab that's at an angle, and that's what remains of the foundation of the theater where all those personalities came and performed. And it's so cool that you see that. And the only reason it's still there is, of course, because it's going to be a logistical nightmare for whoever decides to finally buy that land, and or if they decide to tear that out. And I would love to see something done with it, but I mean, sometimes things like that don't work out. But
No,
just
no.
that's that concrete. It's like, it'd be neat. People come by, take a look at that, and you can just close your eyes for a minute, and you can almost hear the big band music, or you can see the graduation ceremony where these young kids are getting their silver gunner's wings, and then going off and going and doing what we train them to do.
This is really a great, great project, and I want to encourage people to check out your website. And if they've got an extra $5 or so in their pocket, instead of a Starbucks, donate to a great cause. And it's a great warsmuseum.org is the
Yes, sir.
website. And
Yep.
I just want to encourage people to be a part of this. This is like say, and it's very timely that we're doing this because there's so much. Well, World War II, we're losing these veterans at a rapid clip,
Oh,
and our,
absolutely.
our our Vietnam and Korean War veterans are aging out pretty fast too.
Well, they are. You bring that up, and I mean, all the people who I grew up with that I knew that served in World War II are gone. I had both of my grandfathers were in the war. One caught the very tail end. One was in the Pacific as a CB. I guess part of what inspired me so much was I had a awesome opportunity. We had a gentleman that lived in our neighborhood outside of Fort Campbell, and I would ride my bike over to his house. And Pappy, Francis Grove, flew the airplane VFT with the 336 Fighter Squadron, 4th Fighter Group. He flew 63 combat missions in P-51s. And I would ride my bike over to his house, and he would pull out his logbooks, and we would go over a mission. I mean, just an incredible for a kid in middle school who loves military stuff. This was just an amazing
That's,
opportunity. And so, I've always been partial to this stuff. And but yeah, these guys are we're losing them. And
yeah,
the majority of the guys who served in the first part of the war are gone, and anybody that's left, I mean, is 80 years ago. They're well into their low hundreds, late 90s, and another couple of years, Jim, and it'll be like the World War I guys. They're gone.
yeah,
And
yeah, yeah. I've had the distinct privilege of stumbling into. My mom said I was born 90. When I was a kid, one of my best friends to hang out with, chasing blueberries at arrowheads, was a World War I veteran. Um, my wife's family is out of Tombstone,
Okay.
and at a family reunion, the Rose Tree Inn in Tombstone was originally owned by the Macia family. And I was just shocked when, shortly after we were married, to James Macia was at a family reunion, and unassuming fella, and I didn't really get a chance to talk to him, which I regret. Turns out he was a navigator for Doolittle's Raiders.
Oh, wow. How cool is that?
Yeah, and
Yeah,
just
that's amazing. And the thing about it is, we take a story like that and you're like, wow. And I think it's always important for us to remember, and it's something I had to learn. My friend Pappy has this amazing, every man has a war who goes to combat. Uh,
yeah,
Now, some men have more interesting wars than others, but even the ones that aren't quite as interesting, it doesn't make them any less valuable from a historic perspective.
right. No,
There's 10 guys in the back helping to keep that one guy in the front out there and fighting. And
yeah,
that's what we like to focus on. And I mean, we've got some stories of guys that are, and everybody has, I don't care who you are, if you were in the military. And one of the things we're going to be working with some with the Mother Road Media guys is, you hit on, we are starting to lose the Vietnam guys. They're getting into their 70s. And we're going to start doing a program once the building is up and going where we do, a thing where we bring people in, we bring in a couple of veterans and let each of them tell your most interesting story. Because
yeah,
I don't care what you did, you've got at least one story that ought to be shared.
yeah,
And so I think that's an important thing to do so that we can preserve that, because it's up to people like you and me now, Jim, to carry these men's legacy going forward.
mhm,
And that's what I've always told people about our museum project is, I've acquired this collection, and I don't know how most museums get started. I really don't. I'm not a history major. I could be, but uh, you know, making that bridge from collector to museum curator has mostly been driven by, I want this collection to stay together, and I want these men's stories to continue to be told someday when I'm gone. I don't
yeah,
care if 50 years from now anybody knows who I am. I don't care. I just
right.
care that you know who those guys are on that wall. You know that, oh, here's, quick story for your listeners. They'll love this, I think. It's one of my most heartfelt stories. We had, no one saw where this was going, and we had 14 or 15 things on the wall at the pawn shop. And this little old lady comes in, Jim, and she looks at me and she looks up at the wall and she goes, "Is that for sale?" I said, "No, ma'am, I don't sell history. I'm trying to work on a collection of stuff." And she goes, "I'll be right back." I said, "Okay, ma'am." And so she comes back about an hour later and she's got this photo, Jim, and it's not quite 3 by 5. It's a little bit smaller than that. It's that typical 1940s, like 4.5 by 2.5 size photo. It's all wrinkled up. You can tell it's been around. And she hands it to me, and it's got a picture of a sailor, a young woman, and a little girl. And I look at the picture and I'm like, okay, what are we looking at here? And she said, well, she said, this is my Uncle Vern. And I said, okay. And she said, he was my favorite uncle. I said, okay. And she said, that's me as a little girl. That's my mom. That's where we went to his graduation when he left Navy boot camp at Great Lakes. And I said, okay. And she continues on. She says, his name was Vernon Miller. He was lost on the USS Wahoo, which the Wahoo is one of the most famous submarines of World War II. It was lost, I believe, in late 43 with the entire crew in the Sea of Japan. And she said, my family is coming. They're going to put me in a nursing home and they're going to throw Uncle Vern away along with all my stuff. Will you take care of Uncle Vern?
Oh,
That has been etched onto my heart. And so my mission is to not only take care of all the Uncle Verns. And I am proud to say that we took that picture, we scanned it in. We also she brought me a colorized photo, and copies of that now reside with the Bowfin Museum, which is in Honolulu. And they actually have a page dedicated to every sailor who was lost during World War II on a submarine. And when you click on Uncle Vernon, that nice colorized photo is there of him now. So, that's what this is all about.
Excellent. You know, I had this is kind of a dark story, but talking about all these veterans that have stories. And if you've served, been in uniform, even if it was a desk jockey, you played a role, you played a part.
Absolutely.
And a short version of this, I was working a ranch out of Winslow, Arizona when I was younger, and I got to know this old cowboy fellow up there. He was Navajo, and it kind of, a lot of these veterans don't like to talk too much about things. And
Sure.
he shared with me a story as we got to know each other. We were having a cold beer one night, and he said when he was growing up, he was taught that white people were crazy. And he became convinced of it when the recruiter showed up on the reservation, because his entire life he had been put in a boarding school and forbidden to speak Navajo. And now the recruiters show up and are trying to pay him to come speak Navajo. He was one of he was one of the code talkers.
That's awesome. Yeah,
I always
that's
thought
it.
that was a great story. How you've got a pretty diverse background. That is an American story in itself.
Well, it is. It's yeah. I've done. I always. We were just talking about this the other day, and I guess it was probably because I just watched Braveheart the other night, and nothing reminds me more of my life than every man dies, but not every man truly lives. And
Yeah.
yeah, so Pappy, the gentleman I spoke of, the P-51 pilot, got me involved with the Civil Air Patrol when I was young, and I actually learned how to. Well, I soloed with them and did my advanced ratings. I actually graduated high school with my commercial pilot's license. I finished my flight instructor's license up that summer. I started instructing. I worked. I also went to aviation maintenance school at night. So I've done that. I've and Fun story. We were out. I was flight instructing out of Clarksville, Tennessee, and I had a student with me, and he was a cool student. He was one of my. You have different students. You have people who are very serious. I had this kid. He was probably, I say kid. Hell, I was 19. He was a year or two older than me. And we're out in our Cessna 150 in the East Practice area, and we hear this call come into Campbell Approach. They covered the area for traffic, and we hear Douglas 19906, inbound landing at Clarksville. And he looked at me, and I looked at him, and I'm like, Douglas? And he's like, anything built by Douglas has got to be cool. I was like, all right, let's go check it out. And I said, you want to? And he's like, yeah, let's go check it out. And it was my airplane. I said, I'm not going to charge you for the 30 minutes we've been up. Let's go find out what this is all about. And we land, and here's this DC-3 on the ramp. And I walk up to the DC-3, and I'm like, hey, can we check out your airplane, guys? And unbeknownst to me, the gentleman is the owner of this small cargo company, Desert Air Transport. They were headquartered out of Salt Lake City. And Dennis is like, yeah, this is the owner. And Dennis says, yeah, go check it out. And we walk around it and look at it. And he's like, I was like, man, how do you come fly for you guys? And he's like, well, tell me about yourself. And I'm like, well, I'm a flight instructor. And he's like, yeah, okay, boring. And I said, well, I've also got a Cessna 140, which a Cessna 140 is a tailwheel airplane. Mine was built in 1946. It was one of those airplanes that was built for this. Imagine the airplane industry thought all these guys were going to come home who had been bomber pilots and fighter pilots and all this, and they were going to want to fly. And the reality is, most of those guys came home, went back to the farm in the fields, and they didn't care. And it actually destroyed the general aviation industry. It put a bunch of companies out of business. And but anyways, so I was like, well, I've got 200 hours of tailwheel time, and Dennis perks up a little bit, and he's like, oh, well, that's okay. And I said, I'm also going to A&P school at night to be a mechanic. And he's like, oh, let's have a real talk now. He's like, you're interesting to me. And so we went back and forth. We had a conversation, some of which is not repeatable on a public show. So we'll just leave that alone. And anyways, I went to work for him 6 months later, flying cargo in DC-3s, which the DC-3 is a magnificent beast. It was the backbone of the American aviation industry in the late 30s, early 40s. The Army built like 10,000 of them as C-47s. If you've ever, I mean, it's probably the most prolific airliner in history. And if there was ever something that would cement things together, it was, being a pilot, flying DC-3s, loving history. I walked away from aviation after a while due to some things. I mean, I've worked as a large animal vet tech. I had a farm in Kentucky, got manage a pawn shop. I've done a few things. So it's interesting.
That's what's life. And now comes a chapter where you preserve these stories for the next generation. That's
That's absolutely
impressive,
correct.
and
Thank you.
that's a legacy. This is so important. Tom, your story is part of this, but what your goal, what your is so it's so important right now. We need this. We need to tell these stories uh, and provide inspiration. And we also need to encourage people to be careful, our leaders to be careful with their words, because they can have drastic consequences for a lot of folks. And
Absolutely. You're absolutely correct. And I try to, and sometimes it's tough, when you're doing history presentations and stuff, you really try to uh my grandfather taught me when I was a very young kid. And I got to spend a lot of time with my grandfather, Leonard. I loved him to death. He was a CB in the Pacific. Whenever we would transfer from duty station to duty station in the Army, my parents would always send me to go spend time with him. They lived up in Tonawanda, New York. And he had one of those stories. He was a guy that had, grew up in the Depression. And Jim, you've met hundreds, if not thousands, of these Depression era Americans. And
yeah,
there's such an amazing group of people. They saved everything. You're like, why is there a ball of soap slivers in the bathroom? Because you saved everything because they had nothing. And, and he would tell me these stories, but he always told me, he said, Tom, he said, there's three things you need to never discuss in public. And I said, well, what's that? What's that, Grandpa? I called him Papa. I said, what's that, Papa? And he said, you never discuss religion. You never discuss your sex life, and you never discuss politics outside of your house. And I try to live by that. And when you
yes,
get into military history, you have to be very, very careful because politics are a very slippery slope. But you have to present things how they were. You can't
no,
sugarcoat it. You can't make it seem nicer. It's just the way it is. And
no,
one of the stories we tell is the story of the city of Phoenix. And your listeners will like this. I think it's one of the coolest stories that we tell. It's a very sad story. The city of Phoenix was a B-29. Uh, the crew, the captain was a gentleman named James Shoemate. James had moved from the Midwest to Phoenix before World War II. Married a local gal, worked for American Airlines as a mechanic. Uh, had his first airplane, which was called Thunderbird, named after Thunderbird Field. After, I want to say, 12, 13 missions, they were deemed worthy enough to become a lead crew. They came back. They got a new B-29 that had a radar in it. They went back. And the city of Phoenix was shot down the afternoon of August the 8th, 1945. Now, for those not familiar with World War II on a timeline, the war ends on the 14th of August. So this is 6 days before the war ends. These guys get shot down. They were actually the last B-29 shot down by ground defenses outside of Tokyo. One of the last two or three lost for any reason of the war. Two of the men get out. The Japanese citizens are very, very irate. They surround them. The Japanese secret police show up. They grab these two guys up and they tell the citizens, they say, here's the deal. You let us take these guys, you let us interrogate them, and tomorrow we'll let you deal with one of them. And they did. The following morning, one of the gentlemen was sent to the Afuna prisoner of war camp. The other gentleman was taken to a local high school. He was tied to a basketball goal, and the local citizens were allowed to beat him for over 4 hours. In the post-war investigation, uh, lots of things vary according to the eyewitness accounts. Some people say it was 2 hours. Some people say it was four. Some people say there was 200 people there. Some people say there was 800 people there. One thing stands out. The only time this man cried was to ask for water. He was then taken down, taken to a local shrine, and executed. These are stories that have to be told.
yeah, they're not comfortable, but they have to be
They're not
told.
comfortable. It's not comfortable. But here is a guy who dies 5 days, and the war's already lost. The Japanese know the war's over with. We dropped the atomic bomb on the 6th. The morning this man the night before he's executed, the Soviet Union declares war on Japan. The morning before he's executed, we dropped the atomic bomb on Nagasaki. They know this is over, but they still did this. And you have to teach this mentality. You have to understand the brutality that they put not only towards us, but really, and it makes people understand the modern world a little bit better. I mean, what they did to us was bad. What the Japanese did to the people of mainland China was atrocious.
Yes.
And that's why there's still bad blood there. And that's what you people, it's up to us to teach not only these individual stories, because they do, they teach, they make people understand this is why these countries don't like each other still today. And we fill in those blanks for them. So,
When as you teach children, and I've been privileged to speak in a lot of schools here and in Europe, you realize it becomes the awareness of the responsibility. And once you become immersed in this history and wanting to share this, it becomes a very heavy responsibility to do it right and take it seriously, and
oh, absolutely.
and not to be divisive, to bring
Right.
people together in a
What
commonality.
what what I have found with kids is that they just want to be taught.
Yeah,
I hear this over and over again. Kids don't want to learn. No, 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 no. Kids are not being presented with the opportunity to learn. I
yeah,
love it. And one of the cool things about having history on the wall in a pawn shop is that people come into a pawn shop who are never going to go into a museum. And
right.
and so I think that's what I like doing when we go downtown and we set up a display at First Friday, or, we get to go to a school, or, it just happens. Hey, you're driving down the road and you're hauling part of an airplane and you're at a gas station and people are like, "Whoa, what's that?" And all of a sudden now you've got this impromptu history session at the Circle K because you've got a radial engine in the back of your car. You know, People
Yeah.
want to learn. Kids want to learn, and we have to
Yes,
teach them this stuff. And we have to teach it to them with just a unbiased, honest, this is the truth.
right. Yeah, and even at my age, it's funny how you know the history, but you don't know the history, and you get brought up short sometimes with a cold
Sure.
water in the face awareness. One of my trips to Germany, uh, I've developed over the years some very very close friendships, and I shouldn't have been shocked, but I was shocked that we stayed at their home, and there on the mantle was a small framed photo of a fellow in a Wehrmacht uniform and a black ribbon across the frame with a silver swastika. It was their grandfather who had never come home from the Eastern Front.
Sure.
But, even though I knew this, it just brought you up short how close this is, how it's all interrelated. And
Right.
an awareness moment.
Well, one of the things I try to teach, and you know, when you're talking about this, and this is one of my, so Jim, I'm gonna warn all of your listeners, I'm a little weird. Okay. That's
Every Tom, the beauty of this is all of us are weird. Some of us have just embraced our weirdness and done something with it.
that's it. I'm like, I always tell people, I'm like, I used to be the weirdest guy in the room, and then I moved to Arizona, and now I'm not even in the running anymore. But serious. But one of the things that we have in our collection, and this is because everybody knows about crazy cat women, but I am a crazy cat guy. Uh, I met my wife. I was actually between flying jobs. I was working as a large animal vet tech. My wife was a dog groomer, and that's how we met. And anyways, she gave me this. I never liked cats, and she gave me this cat for, God, Petrose is like 17 years old now. And anyways, he was a birthday present. She gave me this little tabby kitten. And anyways, I became a cat guy. And I have this collection of probably 150 original photos and press photos from mostly World War II. There's a few on other sides of it, of soldiers, sailors, airmen with cats. And what's so cool about that is you see a lot. Here's German soldiers with cats. Here's a Japanese soldier with a cat. Here's an Italian with a cat. Here's a Brit with a cat. Here's an American with a cat. And I like to use those as an example that, nations go to war, But the individual soldier, unless he does some sort of atrocious thing, they're they're all the same. These were all just kids. You know,
Yeah.
they were kids. They these 16-year-old, 17-year-old German kids that they handed a rifle and sent to the Eastern Front. They didn't have a choice. You know,
No.
we've actually got a small grouping. It came from a gentleman. His name was Hans. He used to live over in Golden Valley, and he brought it in one day. Hans's dad was in the German Navy during World War II. He was on the German cruiser, the Kolm. And at the pawn shop, I've actually got his stuff. I've got his High Seas Fleet badge, a photo of him in his uniform, a few other things. I found a picture, an original World War II postcard of the Kolm, and we built this little display. And I was like, "Well, how'd your dad end up in the German Navy during World War II?" And he's like, "Well, it was simple." They said, "Well, you're pretty smart here, Mr. Siebold. You can join the German Navy, or you can go to the Eastern Front." And he's like, "The Navy sounds like a great idea." So,
The stories of survival too. Uh, I know I won't get too long winded, but I ran across a story recently that was just so absolutely bizarre. The short version of this story is Japan invaded Korea in the 1930s. A Japanese, but the Korean people were looked down on. They were almost slaves for the Japanese, if you will.
yes,
But a Japanese boy and a Korean boy grew up together, and the Japanese boy became an officer in the Japanese army during the war. The Korean boy was conscripted, and they basically used them as cannon fodder.
sure.
And while fighting in Manchuria, I'm not sure how this all came about, but the Japanese boy and the Korean boy were captured by the Russians of all things, uh, pressed into service as slave gang, clearing minefields by walking through them and these
Yep.
kind of things. They were ended up being captured by the Germans at one point. As Japan was an ally of Germany, the
Yep.
Japanese boy was fluent in German and Japanese. So he was taken into the German army as an interpreter. He saved his Korean friend by claiming he was also a Japanese soldier. These two boys ended up, of all places, they were captured by Americans in Normandy on D Day.
Yes.
And you go, how do you do this? This is a story of survival and adaptation that's just extraordinary.
It's amazing. In fact, actually, I wish I could think of the name of it. There was a Korean movie made 15, 20 years ago about these two gentlemen.
Oh, very good.
Yes. And so the Koreans, not to get on a totally different subject for a moment, but why not? The Koreans make some really, really accurate, good war movies. And they actually did one. It's like 4 hours long, but it's actually about the people of Formosa, which becomes Taiwan. And it's about them and their, the Japanese. That was one of their first conquests. Is right after the Russo-Japanese War, and it's about these people who are, in essence, they're indigenous people. They're fighting with spears. They're no different than really our Native Americans would have been in the 1850s, only with fewer firearms. And it's about how they resisted the Japanese. And I wish I could. Whenever I think of it, I'll see if I can't
Yeah,
find the name of that movie and I'll send it over to you about
yeah.
these two Japanese and the Korean guy. But yeah, they did. They made it all the way around the world basically, and it's just this amazing story of this two guys trying to save each other.
I want to appreciate what you're doing here, Tom, and I want to encourage people to check out the website. When I publish this today, I will make sure there's a link for the website. And I appreciate you taking time for from your family, your cats, and doing this morning. And we didn't even get into. There's so many things I'd like to talk about. I just did an article for Laughlin Tourism. I'm doing a day trip guides and things, and I've been researching the military uh, camps in the Mojave Desert around Needles, Goffs, and the POW camps that were established out towards Essex and Amboy and Ludlow. And there's so many subjects we could discuss. But
Absolutely.
I want to really thank you for your dedication to this. This is a project uh, that we need to get behind, and I want to encourage people to support. And I want to encourage
Well,
people to be inquisitive.
well,
You know,
people should be, and I, and certainly to you, Jim, I appreciate being on your show, and you know, I hope to be invited back again. I would love
yes.
to, yeah, absolutely love to sit down. And Sunday mornings are a great time, and the cat doesn't mind. He's just sitting staring at me right now, so we're good there. So,
Well,
but
we will.
in all,
We'll do this again. We need to.
absolutely, absolutely, and I appreciate your encouragement. I appreciate your listeners' encouragement. I appreciate the people because that's, let's say, this is a museum of the people, for the people, by the people kind of thing. And that's what I tell people. People are like, are you sure you really want to have a museum in New Kingman Butler? And I'm like, absolutely. Absolutely. Because I mean, I want this to be a place where we could do programs and kids can ride their bike over, and parents can bring their children over, and we can encourage, everybody to learn a little bit about history and preserve a little bit, and tell some stories, and do a little educating. So,
Well, this is kind of like the my pa always had these great analogies, but in a roundabout way, it's kind of like the wheel bearing is connected to the muffler, and it kind of. But I see no problem with a museum out in Butler because when Mister Butler was subdividing that, there was a few times that he ran into a live ordnance out there from World War II.
oh, I mean, it's undoubtedly. I mean, I know there was a big project a few years ago where they had to take all the dirt around from some people's houses, and I always try to tell people, guys come into the pawn shop and they're like, "Hey, I found this out in the desert," and of course they've got a 50 caliber projectile, and I'm like, "Yeah, you probably did," and they're like, "Well, how rare is it?" And I we tried to do the math, we tried to figure out, and I don't know if anybody's ever actually come up with a definitive number. If anybody would have, it would have probably been Rob Chillicote, and that knowledge is gone with him. But you know, of the 32,000 aerial gunners that were here, each of them fired roughly 2,200 rounds of 50 caliber ammunition just in the last 2 weeks of air-to-air training. They would fire 1,000 rounds and then 1,200 rounds, week 5, week 6, and that was between here and then they would go down, and some of them would rotate to the Yucca sub base. They were operating out of both places, is where they were doing the live fire exercises. And I think if you put the pencil to that, like 2,200 times 32,000 ish, it's like over 80 million rounds of 50 caliber
Yeah.
ammunition. And that's not counting the ground to ground stuff, the ground to air stuff. So I mean, it's huge. It's an area rich with history, like you say. And I
Yeah.
mean, then you get into, after the war, the guys who worked here scrapping all the airplanes. And
Yes.
what always amazes me, and this guy comes in the pawn shop one day, and that sounds like a bad joke, but it's not. And anyways, the guy comes in a pawn shop and he goes, "Hey, do you want to buy an APU out of a B-24?" An APU is an auxiliary power unit, and they would start that up, and then they would use the power from that to start the big 1830s. And I'm like, "Oh, okay." And his dad had worked at the airfield scrapping airplanes, had brought two of these home and turned one of them into an arc welder because they've got this huge 200 amp DC generator on it. And I'm like, there's that. There now we're right back to that uh, depression era mindset of how do I repurpose something,
Well,
or do something, and it's like, this thing is so cool. We still got it. We want to get it running one of these days, and burn a bead with it. Someone else will have to do it because I can't weld to save my life. But I mean, how that's the kind of ingenuity and things that happen just right here.
have you ever been down at the Powerhouse Museum? I think I can't remember who built this. It was on the tip of my tongue. But there's a fascinating electric wheelchair in the electric vehicle collection at the Powerhouse Visitor Center here in Kingman. And it was a fella that had been at the airfield and scrapping planes. And one of his friends came home with some severe debilitating injuries. So he built him an electric wheelchair out of airplane parts.
Yep,
The pedals for this, the motor, I believe, was from a B-17 turret.
I believe you're
Uh,
correct.
yeah. So yeah,
Yeah,
there's
the engine, the stuff they used and they repurposed. And I mean, Jim, you've been out in the desert. I mean, how many fuel bladders got repurposed as water troughs for cattle?
yeah. And there's so many chapters just in the Kingman story that we have not
Yeah.
told. I'm currently researching the legal situation. There was quite a legal tussle. We put of course, the military was very segregated. Kingman was a sundown town, and the military, there was some pretty intense legal wranglings. We put a colored USO club downtown Kingman.
Yeah, yeah,
That's quite a
that
story.
absolutely. I'm sure that rankled the locals quite a bit at the time. So
Tom, thank you so very much for this. And speaking of young people and speaking of inspiration, I'll wrap this up today with something I think you're going to like and our listeners will like. Next week, I hope you can join us and invite your friends. I stumbled into about a 13-year-old young man around Christmas. His parents got a hold of me and asked if they could buy a couple of my books autographed because their son was very passionate. They had taken him on a Route 66 road trip. He got very passionate about Route 66 and the story of the Great American Road Trip. So I created kind of a care package because I have boxes and boxes of old maps, menus, brochures, postcards, and I sent it out to him. And we started a little bit of a correspondence. This fella is just passionate. And I thought it would be interesting. And I talked to his parents and I talked to Pete, and he's going to join us next week. It's going to be great to get some insight how this generation sees the future of Route 66, the Great American Road Trip, and of course, American history. So I'm really looking forward to our conversation next week. And I hope everybody
absolutely
can
sounds
join us.
awesome.
Guys, I want to thank everyone. We'll do this again next week. We've got some pretty amazing stuff coming up. We're going to be talking with Stuart Rosenbrook in a few weeks. He's the director of the Charlotte Hall Museum in Prescott. We've got Pam LeBlanc, who has decided that to inspire people to embrace life. She goes a little far on this, inspiring people. She's done things like rappelling down 35-story buildings, naked 5K runs, all kinds of wild adventures, swimming with sharks in Fiji. She'll be joining us. We're talking with the organizers of the AAA Route 66 Road Fest. We'll have them on the program. So, yeah. One more note before I go and button this up today. And if anybody has any questions, please chime in or even afterwards, and I'll get them to Tom. Next week, Saturday the 14th, the City of Needles, the California Historic Route 66 Association, they're hosting the Route 66 Info Fair in Needles, California next Saturday. And I'll be down there signing books, answering questions, and helping folks plan a Route 66 adventure. So I hope to see you down in Needles, California. Tom, again, thank you. And I hope you have a great week. And if anybody's got any of these kind of artifacts that need a good home, well, I happen to know somebody that might be interested.
We appreciate that, Jim. Absolutely. It has been our pleasure to join you this morning. And thank you all for tuning in. And we absolutely look forward to doing it again here soon. So
Take care, my friends.
take care, sir.
We'll bid everyone some adios with some great road trip inspiring music from Joe and Woody and my friends there in Nashville with the Road Crew. Roadcrew66.com.
Say hello to a new friend on an old road. Take a 2-lane trip of memories into mysteries unknown. Come along for the ride. Jim Hinckley's America. Jim Hinckley's America.